The air was thinner than paper, the kind of cold that made even silence ache. It was September 9th, 2009, somewhere near 25,000 feet, and Lina Volkov had made her final radio check-in before what she believed would be the most important night of her life. She was camped alone near Camp 3 on the world's second highest and most dangerous mountain, K2, and she sounded calm, peaceful even. "The mountain is quiet tonight," she said through the static, her voice low and deliberate. "I feel ready." Those were her last words. The next morning, as the sun cracked over the ridgelines like broken glass, another expedition team reached Camp 3. They found a tent, or what was left of one, torn, collapsed, half covered in snow. No signs of a fall, no gear inside, just the faint outline of where someone had once lain, and then vanished. There was no blood, no footprints, no ice axes, no note. The ropes she'd used to tether the tent were still partially frozen into the ground, snapped at clean angles, almost as if something had lifted it, or her, straight out of place. Even the expedition leader who discovered the scene couldn't explain what he saw. He was a veteran of Himalayan climbs, a man who didn't believe in ghosts or curses or any of that. But when asked what it looked like, he simply said, "It didn't look like she left. It looked like she was taken." From that moment forward, Lina Volkov became a name whispered in climbing circles, a case study in mountain mystery, and a question mark carved into the ice of K2's brutal slopes. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching this from, because by the end of this story, I guarantee you'll be thinking differently about what it means to vanish without a trace. Lina wasn't a rookie, far from it. At just 31, she'd already completed solo ascents of Denali, Aconcagua, and even Everest, where she deliberately chose a lesser-used northeast ridge to avoid the crowds. But K2 was different. It was sharper, colder, and far more unpredictable. Climbers don't just die on K2. They disappear into it. Avalanches, crevasses, or worse, altitude-induced confusion that makes the brain betray the body. But Lina had trained for this. Months of high-altitude conditioning, endless cold-weather drills in Iceland, Colorado, and Norway. She kept journals, vlogs, and voice recordings. She wasn't looking for fame. She wasn't even posting updates online. This trip was something personal, spiritual even. She called it her conversation with silence. Those close to her knew she'd been preparing this route for over a year. She'd turned down sponsors. She'd refused team offers. She wanted solitude. "There's something up there I need to meet alone," she once told a friend during a long hike in the Andes. And so she went. A single permit, minimal gear. One of the few women, and even fewer solo climbers, attempting K2 that season. What happened that night? A storm rolled in around 1 a.m. Not unusual, but reports from other camps said it came too fast. Wind speeds tripled in under 10 minutes. Snowfall turned horizontal. Tents shook, ropes whined, and voices on the radio crackled into chaos. Lina's tent was pitched on a relatively sheltered ledge. She'd staked it in well. But by dawn, all that remained was that shredded cloth, bent poles, and the eerie impression of absence. Rescue teams were grounded for 2 days due to weather. When they finally returned to her last known location, it was too late. No sign of a fall, no equipment at the base of cliffs. Her body wasn't recovered. Her sat phone, equipped with an emergency locator and was never activated. And perhaps most chilling, her GoPro, which she always wore, was gone. A formal report was filed. "Presumed lost during the storm," it said. But even those who signed it admitted something about it felt off. Lina's family, devastated but composed, asked the climbing community for information. Her sister, Katya, gave a statement outside their childhood home in Ukraine. "Lina believed the mountain spoke," she said. "I hope, if nothing else, she found what she was listening for." But privately, her family never accepted the official conclusion. They funded multiple expeditions over the next few years. Drones were flown. Thermal imaging was used. Ground-penetrating radar, nothing. It was as though the mountain had inhaled her and never exhaled. Then, the stories began. At first, they were harmless, just murmurs. Climbers claimed they'd seen a red figure, Lina's signature jacket, just past the icefall ridge. Always in the distance, always still. One man said he radioed to warn the figure that an avalanche risk was nearby. He got no response. But when he looked through binoculars, there was no one there. Another group reported hearing a woman singing at high altitude during an overnight stay at Camp 4. There were no women on their team. There were no other groups nearby. They thought it was altitude sickness, until two members later described the same song, note for note. Could it all be imagined? Symptoms of oxygen deprivation hallucinations? Maybe. But even hardened climbers started leaving offerings at her last known site. Coins, scarves, handwritten notes. They began calling her the Silent Woman of K2. And then in 2023, something broke the silence. But that's for later. What matters now is this. Lina Volkov didn't just disappear, she dissolved, melted from memory into myth. And in doing so, she left behind more than questions. She left behind echoes. This is not a story about a woman who got lost in the snow. This is a story about what happens when a person walks to the edge of the world, and maybe, just maybe, steps off. The world watched, briefly, as the headlines flickered across the news cycle. Solo climber missing on K2. But as quickly as the initial buzz rose, it faded under the weight of global noise. Another tragedy on a deadly mountain. That's how the public categorized it. A sad statistic. A name on a list. And yet, to those who knew her, Lina Volkov wasn't some anonymous hiker swallowed by snow. She was intentional. She was prepared. And she did not make careless mistakes. That belief, held firmly by her family, by her climbing partner, and by a handful of seasoned mountaineers, became the engine behind what would quietly become the most intensive private search effort in K2's modern history. Within 5 days of Lina's disappearance, Pakistani authorities suspended all summit attempts and approved an international coalition of rescuers. Helicopters were deployed from Skardu. Sherpa teams were redirected. Even drones, relatively new in high-altitude search operations at the time, were flown up in dangerous gusts, attempting to scan the crevices and cliffs near Camp 3. But it didn't matter. K2 answered with storms. 3 days into the operation, the sky turned. Winds surged past 70 miles per hour. Temperatures dropped below 40 degrees Celsius. Rescue attempts were halted. Days passed, then weeks. When the weather finally relented and boots returned to the ice, they found a different mountain. Snow had repainted the entire terrain. Ridges collapsed. Ice bridges melted and reformed. Whatever clues may have existed were erased with surgical precision. The spot where her tent had once stood was buried beneath meters of snowdrift. The path down the slope no longer existed in the same way. Even anchor points had shifted. Still, searchers combed every viable direction. Rope teams scanned the drop-offs. Heat signatures were checked. Nothing. Not a trace. Not even the broken remains of gear. And slowly, the narrative began to fracture. Some experts claimed Lina must have suffered a fall, perhaps disoriented by the weather, perhaps during a midnight attempt to retrieve gear or reposition her camp. But those who studied the terrain closely questioned it. There were no signs of slippage, No markings or disturbances along the vertical drop zones. And why leave the safety of a tent, even a damaged one, into a worsening storm? Others speculated a different fate, a high-altitude fugue state. Hypoxia, combined with solitude and sensory deprivation, could theoretically cause a climber to wander, forget who they were, or even become convinced they'd already reached the summit. There were cases, rare but real, of climbers found miles off route, half-dressed, barefoot, hallucinating. Was it possible Lina simply walked into the white, mind clouded by thin air? Her family didn't buy it. Lina's younger sister, Katya, held press conferences in Islamabad, calm, measured, refusing to let the media simplify her siblings' fate. She trained for this, Katya repeated again and again. She understood the mountain. She knew the symptoms. This was not disorientation. They hired a private logistics company, outfitted with advanced gear. In the spring thaw of 2010, a second team launched a multi-week grid search along the eastern ridges and glacial valleys. This time they focused not only on traditional fall zones, but less obvious paths, narrow ledges, wind-blown snow pockets, even ice caves. But K2 offered nothing. No remains, no equipment, no torn jackets fluttering like flags in the ice, no weather-beaten journal tucked inside a tent seam, not even a snapped crampon or lost glove. Just absence. Even more frustrating? The GPS logs from her sat phone, expected to provide a breadcrumb trail of her movements, were corrupted. Whether by frost, solar radiation, or something else, the last ping showed only her stationary position from the night she radioed in. After that, void. People began to move on. The expedition season resumed. K2 claimed 3 more climbers that year. Lina's story fell into the margins, a cautionary tale, but nothing new, except to her partner. Jonas Murai, a fellow climber and Lina's longtime partner, had spoken with her just before she left for Pakistan. He had planned to join her, had even helped map the route, but a fractured ankle weeks earlier had grounded him. After her disappearance, he went silent. He refused interviews, canceled trips, deleted social media. He moved from their shared apartment and, for all intents and purposes, disappeared. Friends said he traveled through Nepal and then Tibet. Some say he tried to summit K2 himself in 2011, but pulled out last minute. Others whisper he kept climbing alone, obsessively, looking for signs of her across every ridge that reminded him of her last ascent. In 2013, her family tried again. This third expedition was smaller, quieter. Just 2 hired climbers, a drone technician, and a Pakistani liaison officer. This time they focused on theory. What if Lina hadn't fallen? What if she hadn't wandered? What if she was taken? They searched crevasses not on any map, ice tubes that funneled wind like organ pipes, places where the temperature never rose above -50. They lowered sonar probes, checked ice thickness, used LiDAR to penetrate snowdrifts. Nothing. And yet some of the team returned home, unsettled. One Sherpa reported feeling watched the entire descent. Another swore he saw something red, a patch of fabric maybe, disappear behind a ridge as they packed up base camp. But when he pointed it out, it was gone. Lina's disappearance had by then calcified into something else. It wasn't just a mystery. It was a silence that echoed, a gap in the narrative that refused to close. She wasn't in a grave. She wasn't on a list of fallen climbers. And she wasn't on the mountain, either. She was simply not anywhere. And then 14 years after her final words echoed through a crackling radio. Someone found something that shouldn't have been there. A photograph, a message, and a trail leading back to the one place everyone thought had been searched 100 times before. You'll see what they found soon enough. Lina Volkov wasn't supposed to be the kind of person who vanished. not without a trace, not without a fight. And certainly not in the middle of doing what she did best. Born in 1978 in a gray, concrete-blurred town on the outskirts of Minsk, Lina's earliest memories were of frost, biting through socks, crawling under doors, cutting through the seams of windows. Her father, a mechanic, her mother, a nurse. Life was neither cruel nor kind, just cold, relentless, and ordinary. Her childhood, as later described by those who knew her, was one of stark duality, deeply withdrawn, yet fiercely protective of the few people she let close. She read constantly. Russian folk tales, mountaineering memoirs, survival guides, even old Soviet weather reports. As she got older, her fascination narrowed. The colder the place, the more she wanted to know about it. At 13, she mapped every known route up the north face of Elbrus. Not for school, not for a project, just because. By the time she was 20, she had left home. Quietly, without ceremony, she moved west, first to Warsaw, then Berlin, then finally a one-bedroom apartment in Geneva she never fully unpacked. She worked jobs that let her leave for months at a time. Freelance translator, gear tester, occasional photographer. Anything that could fund her one obsession: isolation. Her first climb wasn't famous. It wasn't filmed or sponsored, just a lone summit attempt in the Tatras during winter, when no one else dared to try. She carried a single camera, a paper map, and a notebook filled with scribbled phrases like, "The wind is cruel today, and therefore honest." She summited, returned with frostbite on 3 fingers, said nothing. Then came Denali, Aconcagua, the Chilean Andes. She never joined large groups, rarely used guides. Her reputation built quietly, a sort of whispered myth among climbers. The woman who went alone. The one who didn't speak much, but always made it down. But it was Everest that changed her. In 2007, she summited solo via the North Route, a path notorious not only for its technical danger, but for the psychological cost. She made it down, but barely. Her journal from that trip, leaked years later, includes passages that border on madness. There are sounds above 8,000 m. No one believes you, but they are there, like wind speaking in a voice that isn't quite yours. I passed a man frozen with his eyes open. He was smiling. I thought about lying down beside him. After Everest, she disappeared for nearly a year. No climbs, no interviews. Just gone. Some assumed she'd quit. Others thought she was recovering. But she returned. And this time, different. Those close to her, if such a thing existed, described it as a shift. She wasn't chasing summits anymore. She was chasing stillness, silence. Not just physical silence, but something deeper. A silence of self. An erasure. In 2008, she self-published a small book of essays and fragments titled, "What the Cold Takes from You." It was raw, poetic, and unsettling. One reviewer called it a meditation on death, told in whispers of snow and shadow. Some excerpts. To be above the clouds is not freedom, it's confrontation. At a certain height, your body forgets it is yours. Your hands become questions. Your breath becomes a bargain. I don't climb for victory. I climb to subtract. It was around this time she became fixated on K2. To outsiders, it seemed like the next logical step. But those who read between the lines of her writings knew something else was brewing. K2 was not Everest. It was not tourist-trampled, not crowded with flags and sponsorships. It was known as the Savage Mountain, the one that kills you for assuming it can't. She didn't want to conquer K2, she wanted to meet it. Lina's K2 plan was meticulous. Months of physical training, custom gear modifications, a deliberately minimal route, No guides, no film crew, no satellite uplink. Just a simple check-in system via postcard and shortwave bursts when weather allowed. In her final recorded interview, given to a climbers podcast in Switzerland, the host asked, "Why alone again? Why not take someone with you this time?" Her answer was calm. "You cannot hear the mountain if someone else is speaking." The host chuckled. She didn't. And then she was gone. A quiet goodbye to Katya at the Geneva train station, a plane to Islamabad, a drive to Skardu, and finally a small group of porters who carried her gear to base camp in early June. There's a photo, one of the last confirmed sightings of her, taken by a British climber who passed her near Camp 1. She's looking up the slope, not at the camera. Goggles reflect a sky streaked with clouds. Her expression unreadable, not joy, not fear, something in between. By late July, she had made it to Camp 3. That much is confirmed. Her tent, discovered days after the storm, was torn, not by claws or tools, but wind, the kind of wind that slices nylon like paper. But no blood, no signs of panic, just a missing woman, and silence. That was the end of Lina Volkov's known story. But not the end of her story. Something remained, hidden in notebooks, whispered in her last message, etched into the mountain itself. "We're only just beginning to understand it. They said the mountain went quiet after Lina disappeared. Not in the literal sense. The wind still howled, the ice still cracked and shifted like ancient bones under strain. But something else had changed. Something just beneath the surface of sound. Climbers began to describe it with language that didn't belong in expedition logs or summit reports. Off, unnatural, wrong. Not everyone, of course. Most reached Camp 3 and returned with nothing but frostburn and stories of hardship. But those who stayed just a little too long, who pushed just a bit too far up the ridge, they came back different. It started small. Reports buried in forums, late-night podcasts, and private climbing groups. A Swedish climber, in 2011, said his headlamp kept flickering at the same curve of the mountain near Camp 3. Always in that one spot. Batteries replaced, wires checked. Still, it failed. Only there. Then, without warning, it would blink back on, as if nothing had happened. A year later, a Canadian woman attempting a solo climb radioed her base team with a strange update. "I think someone's above me. Can't see them, but I hear something. Almost humming?" When asked to clarify, she laughed it off. Said it was probably the altitude. She aborted the climb that night. By 2015, rumors started forming their own pattern. More than one climber claimed they heard whispering around Camp 3. Not the wind, actual voices. Indistinct, low, overlapping. One Sherpa described it as a conversation behind a door you're not supposed to open. It didn't make sense. There were no other expeditions nearby at the time. No known climbers above that point. No radios transmitting on their frequency. A Nepali porter, Dorje, was the first to speak openly about it to a journalist. He'd summited K 2-3 times, but in 2016, he refused to return to Camp 3 after a single night. His reason was blunt. She watches. When pressed, he clarified. On the second night at Camp 3, he'd awoken suddenly, with no sound and no wind outside. Just stillness. That's when he saw a silhouette, standing perfectly still on the ridge above their tents, cloaked in red, not moving, not swaying, just watching. He woke the others, but by the time they got outside, it was gone. The next morning there were no tracks, no signs anyone had passed through, and it had snowed lightly. Fresh powder should have recorded even a bird's step. The expedition's lead brushed it off as hallucination. Cold, thin air, too little sleep. But Dorje wouldn't go back. He quit midway up the mountain. Said he'd go to Everest again, even Annapurna, but never K2. The same year, an experienced Italian climber brought a drone to map the upper ridges. One of his videos, uploaded quietly to a niche climbing forum, caused a stir, not because of what was visible, but what wasn't. The drone, flying high above Widow's Edge, the name local guides had begun using for the ledge above Camp 3, showed a strange anomaly. A red shape, barely discernible through the ice fog. The moment the camera panned toward it, the feed cut out. Just static. When recovered, the footage had a 5-second gap. File corrupted. Those frames never returned. What unnerved people wasn't just the image, but the detail. Lina had been wearing red, a rare color choice for K2, where most climbers favor high-contrast neon for visibility. But Lina had chosen a deep, blood-red jacket. Said she liked how it disappeared in the rock. That was her phrasing. Disappeared in the rock. A year later, a Sherpa from a smaller group slipped while crossing a narrow ledge above Camp 3. The fall wasn't fatal, just far enough to crack his ribs. But when his team found him, he was trying to crawl back up the ridge, bleeding, barely conscious. His first words were, "She was calling me." That same season, a British climber swore he saw someone walking barefoot at dawn. No ropes, no gloves, no pack. Just a human shape, moving slowly along the ridgeline, silhouetted against the ice-blue light of morning. He called out, "No answer." Then the figure turned and walked behind a boulder. When the climber reached the spot, no one, not even footprints. Some thought it was superstition. Just the usual stories that gather around dangerous places. But the pattern kept growing. Climbers who stayed at Camp 3 reported hearing their names whispered in the dark. Radios shorted out for exactly 11 seconds. Always 11. GPS devices showed elevation changes even when climbers weren't moving. One mountaineer found her tent door unzipped from the outside. Her teammates swore it was closed. The name Widow's Edge took root not from superstition, but from a fact. 4 climbers who passed the ridge alone had died in unrelated accidents within 2 years. Each had summited. Each had mentioned something strange around Camp 3. And then, in 2019, something changed. A photograph surfaced. Taken by a German expedition member at base camp, it captured the upper slope under unusually clear weather. Nothing special, just a scenic shot. But when zoomed in, a red figure can be seen standing above Camp 3. Perfectly still. No movement. The photographer hadn't noticed at the time. It's not proof, it's not confirmation. But it lines up with every other story, every whisper, every shadow on the ridge, and still, no one has explained the voices. They're not audible in recordings, only heard by those there. Even now, as you read this, there are climbers preparing to summit K2. Some will reach Camp 3, some will hear the whispers. Most will ignore them, but a few will listen too long. And they might see the figure in red. And if they do, they may never make it past the ridge. Because once she notices you, something strange happens. You start forgetting what you came for. The glacier hadn't seen human footprints in nearly a decade. The route was avoided for good reason. Unstable ice, sudden drops, and wind that could turn skin to frost in minutes. But in early January of 2023, a trio of seasoned climbers, 2 Swiss, 1 Pakistani, decided to make an attempt, drawn by challenge more than glory. Their goal wasn't even to summit K2. It was to test themselves against a face of the mountain few dared touch in winter. What they didn't expect was to find her. At first, it didn't register as a body. From a distance, it looked like a dark stain in the translucent wall. Something trapped, something unnatural. They approached, thinking it was old gear, maybe a backpack lost during a fall, but the closer they got, the more the shape sharpened. It was a woman, frozen mid-expression, arms angled forward as if caught in the act of bracing herself. Her face turned outward, pressed behind a veil of fractured ice. She was upright, almost standing, entombed vertically inside a frozen wall. The red jacket made the truth hit hard. It wasn't just a woman. It was Lina Volkov. Her face was disturbingly well preserved. Even under layers of frost and trapped air, her expression was visible, mouth slightly open, as if in surprise or breathless whisper. Her eyes unfrozen. Not closed in death, not sealed by time, wide open, glassy, alert, as if she was still seeing something. The climbers immediately radioed base. A recovery team was scrambled. No one wanted to believe it at first, but satellite images later confirmed the coordinates. It was Lina. The woman who vanished 14 years ago without a trace had been found embedded in solid ice, less than 900 meters off her last known route. But here's where the story broke from tragic into something else entirely. First, her harness was intact, except for the main line that should have tethered her to a partner or anchor. It wasn't frayed. It hadn't snapped. It was cut. Clean, straight through, as if someone had taken a knife to it and severed it deliberately. Second, her boots were gone. Not buried in the snow below, not left on the trail. Just missing. Her socks, still thick and clean, remained. No signs of tearing or struggle. Just absence. Boots gone, as if they'd been removed after death. Or before. Third, her camera. Still strapped across her chest, old-school mountaineering rig. Despite the years and ice, it was recoverable. The team took it down with extreme care, carving a path around her, using thermal blades to keep the body intact. When the camera was extracted and warmed back at base, they removed the memory card. The data was still there. Photos, nearly 200 of them, chronicled her final days. Most were typical of high-altitude climbs: jagged ridgelines, snowfields, gear, sunrises. In one, Lina stands smiling next to a flag she planted at Camp 2. In another, she stares down from a ledge, her reflection caught in the lens of her goggles. But the final 10 photos were different. The lighting changed, blurry, dim, night shots mostly, taken from inside her tent. In one, the camera appears to have been resting on her chest, angled toward the tent door. The flap is closed, but there's a silhouette pressing against it. Human-shaped, unmistakably standing. In the next image, the flap is open, just blackness, nothing inside. Then, a flash photo. The image shows snow and rock, but something's wrong with the perspective. The camera seems to be angled awkwardly, as if she's lying down or being dragged. The final photo is the one that stopped the investigators cold. Lina's face, up close, as if she's holding the camera up to herself, her eyes wide, not scared, focused. Her lips slightly parted. The image grainy and overexposed from the flash, but clear enough to make out the background. Behind her, just barely visible in the white blur, is another figure. Shadowed. Tall. No gear, no ropes. Just there. There were no footprints found near the ice wall. No gear. No sign of how she got into that position. Even stranger, her body had no fractures. No signs of a fall, no internal injuries, no bruising, no frostbite on the visible skin. It was as if she had stepped into the wall and allowed the glacier to swallow her, vertically, upright, with a frozen stare. Autopsy could only confirm what was already clear. Lina had died of hypothermia. A slow, ordinary death, inside something that made no sense. Her family was notified. Her sister flew to Pakistan within 48 hours. She'd long stopped believing Lina had simply fallen. When shown the final image from the camera, she reportedly wept and said something strange. That's the face she made when she knew something, when she figured things out. The image, though never released publicly, spread among the climbing community like wildfire. Whispers reignited. Articles quietly retracted their previous theories. People began asking, why was she alone? Who or what was in that last photo? More importantly, why did she go off-route? She had mapped her climb meticulously. Lina wasn't known for improvisation. Yet somehow, she ended up 900 meters off the projected path. In a place where no one goes, where no one should be. Recovery efforts wrapped within 2 weeks. Lina's body was flown home, but that glacier, that wall? Climbers say it's different now. Some refuse to use that route. Others claim they've seen her again, still standing, still watching. The mountain is never truly silent. Lina's camera was one of those hardy old Canon models, bulkier than modern GoPros, but reliable. Weather-sealed, designed for high-altitude filming. It had been encased in ice with her. The strap still looped across her shoulder like she'd intended to shoot until the end. When the recovery team extracted it, no one expected it to work. But once thawed and charged at base camp, the LED flickered to life. The date, July 19th, 2009, 3 days before she vanished. There were 24 video entries in total. Most were exactly what you'd expect from a meticulous climber logging her ascent. Lina was calm, focused, even smiling. She documented weather changes, terrain markers, gear status. She joked into the lens about her dehydrated meals, about her gloves freezing stiff overnight. In one clip, she holds up a thermos and laughs. Tea tastes better at 20,000 feet. Science can't explain it. She spoke often about silence, how different the quiet on K2 felt from other climbs. It's not that it's too quiet, she said in one clip, panning the camera across a snowy ledge. It's that it's listening, like I'm not alone up here. Entry #19 was the first that felt different. Shot at twilight, inside her tent. She's bundled up, camera angled close. Her expression is more alert than usual. She's holding her breath. Then, in a whisper, she says, "The mountain is whispering again, but now it knows my name." The next 30 seconds are just her face, flickering in and out of shadow from a single LED lamp hanging above her. She keeps glancing at the tent door, like she's waiting. Then the feed cuts. Entry #20 resumes in daylight. She's standing at the edge of a drop-off, camera tight on her face. She's not wearing goggles or a face mask, which is odd. Her cheeks are red and raw, but her eyes are clear. "I dreamed last night that someone was waiting for me at the summit," she says quietly. But they had no face. She pauses. Not like it was missing, like it had never been there at all. She doesn't smile. She doesn't blink. Then she turns the camera toward the horizon, toward a cragged ridge just visible through the morning mist. The video shakes for a moment, as if she's trembling. "It's there again. I can feel it." Click. End of video. Entry #21 is corrupted, completely blank. Just static and a distorted time code that reads 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 0 seconds. It won't play, even after digital recovery, like something was recorded, then scrubbed. Entry #22 is the most watched by investigators. It's shot at night, again inside the tent. Only this time there's no opening commentary. The camera is on, but Lina doesn't speak. She's just sitting in front of the lens, barely breathing. Her eyes look tired, but not frightened. More like resigned. A minute in, she leans towards the camera. "If this is found, I need you to know I wasn't scared. I wanted to understand, but I think it understood me first." She glances to her left, as if someone, or something, is beside her. Then she smiles. Just a faint, slow curl of her lips. Not joy, not relief, a recognition. The clip ends mid-frame, the LED light overhead flickering once, then dying. But it's entry #23 that truly chills. The file is intact. It's longer than the others, almost 6 minutes. The image opens with her outside, standing about 20 feet from the tent, camera set on a tripod. Her jacket is unzipped. The wind is audible, high and fierce, yet her hood doesn't flutter. Her hair lies flat. That's the first clue that something is off. She doesn't speak, she just stares. At first it seems she's looking at the camera, but then you notice her gaze is slightly off, over the shoulder of the lens, toward something behind it, something close. 2 minutes in, a sound begins. Low, rhythmic. Not wind, not static, like breathing, not hers. She doesn't react. At 4:17, the image flickers, just for a frame. Some viewers say there's a shape, tall, narrow, impossible to define, that appears for a split second behind her. It's not confirmed, but once you see it, it's hard to unsee. At 5:12, she finally speaks. "I thought it was silence," she whispers, "but it was waiting." Then the screen goes black. No sign-off, no final words, just darkness. Entry #24 is just a single frame, a still image, pitch black, nothing visible. And yet, when brightened and digitally enhanced, something faint emerges in the lower third of the frame. Text, handwritten shaky. It reads, "Don't answer if it calls your name." Investigators can't confirm whether she wrote it. They can't even explain how it got into the frame. The camera was never configured to shoot stills. No one knows when it was taken, or how. But the text is real. It's burned into the video file, etched in with a metadata timestamp that reads, July 21st, 3:33 a.m., exactly 90 minutes before her tent was found shredded. And now, even years later, climbers report hearing voices near Camp 3. Soft, whispering, repeating names. Sometimes the same one over and over. Lina. Under a white tarp in the lab at Skardu, the harness lay stretched on a steel table, still frozen in sections, delicate threads glinting under the inspection lights. It had taken days to thaw properly. Forensics didn't want to risk damaging what they knew might be the single, most important piece of physical evidence in Lina Volkov's disappearance. It was unmistakably hers. Customized loops, reinforced stitching, initials LV stitched into the waist belt. Everything about it checked out. But one thing didn't. The main lifeline, the rope that would have connected her to either an anchor point or a climbing partner, was cut. Not snapped, not worn, not frayed by tension or ice. Sliced. A perfect single pass through the cord, no jagged edges, no compression, no stretching. It hadn't happened under duress or while she was falling. It was clean, precise, done with intent. The lead forensic analyst stated flatly, "This was no accident." That was when everything changed. Up until then, Lina's reappearance had been treated as a tragic mystery. A climber lost to the elements, finally found. But now, the case wasn't about survival or navigation errors. It was about intervention. Someone, or something, had actively contributed to her death. But who would cut a climber's lifeline at 25,000 feet? More chilling was the discovery that came next. As part of the recovery, a drone had scanned the immediate area around the glacier wall where Lina's body had been found. Standard procedure. The terrain was dangerous, thin ice layers, sudden crevasses, and the drone was equipped with LiDAR to create detailed topographical maps. The images returned showed something that didn't make sense. A wide circular track, about 4 meters across, lightly indented into the ice, surrounding the location of Lina's body. No human footprints, no gear impressions. Just a single, perfect arc. A drag mark, continuous, with no breaks. like something massive had spun slowly in place, or been set down, and then lifted. Veteran climbers reviewed the footage. None could identify what would leave a track like that. "No sled, no rescue gear, no gear I've ever seen," said one guide. "It almost looks like a wheel. But what kind of wheel moves like that up here?" That phrase, "what kind of wheel," ignited theories. And then the older cases started to resurface. A Japanese climber in 1986, missing for 2 weeks, found impaled on a spire of ice in a region he wasn't climbing. A Polish alpinist in 1992 discovered seated inside a hollow glacier shaft, boots gone, eyes wide open, arms crossed neatly across his chest. Both had snapped climbing ropes. Both had written strange final messages in their summit logs. One of them read, "The mountain hears when you speak its name." Until Lina, those cases were treated as isolated tragedies. Now, researchers and mountaineers alike were looking at K2 differently. A climatologist from the University of Bern published a brief, rapidly censored paper about geomagnetic anomalies around Camp 3. He noted unexplainable EM interference in radio frequencies going back decades, including disruptions logged on military satellite data. Nothing conclusive, just another coincidence. But it wasn't just science that got involved. An anthropologist from Islamabad, Dr. Naeem Arif, reached out to Lina's family. He'd spent the last 15 years studying folklore along the Baltoro Glacier, speaking to local porters, older generations who had never trusted the newer climbing routes. He claimed the path Lina took was once known in Balti oral tradition as Zange Sukna, the place of speaking silence. "There were stories," he told investigators, "of voices that mimic, that draw you off the path. Travelers who go up and return with no memory, or don't return at all." When pressed, he hesitated before sharing a term from the oldest stories. Kalan. Translated loosely, it means the hollowed, spirits or entities that call from high places, imitating familiar sounds, loved ones, even your own voice. The term appears in early 20th century expedition journals, too. A 1906 British party noted that Sherpas refused to cross a particular ridgeline after dark. The guide recorded, "They spoke of the hollow women who whisper invitations from behind the wind." Of course, none of this made it into official reports. The Pakistani Alpine Club quietly closed off the route where Lina was found. "Unstable ice conditions," they said. But locals knew better. Porters refused to set up base camps within a mile of the glacier wall. Even seasoned climbers started avoiding it altogether. One more detail was withheld from the public. In a sealed envelope delivered to Lina's sister by the recovery team, there was a final object from her person. Not a letter, not a journal. A scrap of paper, found crumpled in the lining of her coat. It bore only a crude drawing, done in frozen graphite, shaky but deliberate. 6 vertical lines, thin and long. 1 horizontal line across the middle, and above them, a circle. To some, it looked like a stick figure. To others, it looked like a cage. But her sister recognized it instantly. "It's what Lina used to draw as a child," she said. "She called it the Watcher." She had never explained what it meant. And now no one would ask. Because no one was sure they wanted to know. Of all the artifacts recovered from Lina Volkov's final ascent, it was the letter, tucked deep within the waterproof lining of her downpack, that brought the silence to a halt. It wasn't labeled. No envelope. Just several pages folded into a sealed Ziploc, worn from friction but perfectly dry. Her name wasn't even written on it. But the first line was unmistakable. "If this ever gets to you, Katya, then something went wrong." It was addressed to her younger sister, Katya Volkov, who'd waited more than a decade for some kind of closure. Investigators initially kept the letter classified, claiming it was too personal. But Katya insisted. She'd been the one Lina always wrote to before summits. Every mountain came with a postcard, a recorded voice note, or a crumpled list of gear paired with sarcastic notes like, "Tent poles X3, in case I get ambitious and build a hotel." But this was different. The tone wasn't light, it wasn't casual. It was like Lina had seen something, or felt something, that she hadn't been ready to share until she truly believed she wouldn't make it back. The letter was written in ballpoint pen, blue ink, neat and deliberate at first. But as the pages continued, the lines curved more erratically, as though her hands were colder, or her thoughts were racing faster than her fingers could follow. Here's what it said. "Katya, if this ever gets to you, Katya, then something went wrong. Not because I fell, not because I wasn't ready, but because I went too far. This isn't one of those goodbye letters you see in movies. I'm not resigned. I'm not panicking. I just don't know what else to do with what I'm seeing, and I need someone to believe it happened. The higher I've climbed, the quieter it's become. I don't just mean the air or the absence of sound. I mean the presence of silence. It's not empty, it's full. Like there's something here with me, not watching, not threatening, just waiting. I can't explain how I know that. It's like a weight behind your eyes, like a memory you don't remember having, but you feel. 2 nights ago I heard music, not from my radio, not from another climber. I hadn't seen anyone in 3 days. It wasn't even music, really, more like a pattern. 5 notes, low, repeating. I thought it might be ice shifting, but it followed me. Up the ridge, around a blind turn. I kept stopping, and it would stop too. But when I moved again, it started again. I'm not scared. That's what's strange. It's like I should be, but I'm not. I feel like something is inviting me, not pulling or forcing, just offering. I dreamt last night I was in our childhood apartment. Only it wasn't winter outside. It was endless white, like the windows had no glass, just snow beyond them forever. Mom was in the kitchen, but when I tried to talk to her, she just looked up and said, "It doesn't end at the summit." Then the stove clicked on, and everything disappeared. That's when I woke up and wrote this. I'm not sure how much further I'll go. The weather is closing in again, and I feel like I'm not alone up here. Not in the scary way, in the recognized way, like I've been here before. If I don't make it, tell them I saw something no one will believe, and I followed it. Not because I was lost, because I wanted to see where it ended. Tell them it didn't feel like death, it felt like home. I love you. Don't follow me. Lina. When Katya read the letter, she reportedly collapsed. Not from grief. She had long accepted Lina's death, but from something deeper. Recognition. She told the investigator something chilling. I had that same dream, she whispered. The apartment, the windows, Mom in the kitchen. She said the same thing. It doesn't end at the summit. She'd never told anyone. When news of the letter reached the climbing world, debates exploded. Was Lina hallucinating, succumbing to oxygen deprivation? Or had she truly encountered something? There was no way to know. But the tone of the letter, grounded, clear, uncoded, wasn't like anything else found at high altitudes. It didn't read like madness. It read like resolution. Some said Lina went insane. Others believed she discovered something transcendent. But the most unsettling theory came from a climatologist who reviewed her journal alongside the letter. He wasn't interested in poetry, only in timelines. She wrote the letter the same night her camera recorded that final video, he said. The timing matches. Right after the whispering. Right after the tent light flickered out. Which means she sat down after that. After hearing the breathing, after watching the figure outside. and calmly wrote a farewell to her sister, not out of fear, but choice. It was the last complete thing Lina ever wrote. And it ends not with dread, but with something harder to define, a kind of peace. One not everyone found comforting. The final mystery wasn't where Lina went, it was why she followed. They did not bring her down the mountain, not because they couldn't. The recovery team had the equipment, and the descent route was stable enough. But because Katya, after reading the letter and holding the final frozen possessions of her sister, made a decision that shocked even the hardened climbers. She didn't want to leave, Katya said quietly. There was no ceremony, no procession, just a single day when the snow briefly softened, and the ice gave way to a natural cave near the ridge where Lina was found, a cave that hadn't been there the week before. It was shallow, dry, oddly shaped like a crescent, as if carved by wind rather than water or time. They placed Lina there, wrapped in thermal layers, her pack at her side, and the final letter pressed against her chest. One Sherpa whispered a blessing. Katya didn't cry. She followed something none of us could understand, she said. I won't drag her back. The Pakistani authorities, after some protest, agreed to honor the family's request. The spot was sealed with ice markers and mapped. A digital log was added to the official summit registry, noting that Lina Volkov, 31, Russian-born US-raised, would remain on the mountain she chose. Later that summer, a small metal plaque was fixed into the rock face near Camp 3. Most climbers miss it as they pass, but those who do stop say the same thing. It's not what the plaque says, it's the feeling they get when they read it. The inscription is simple. She followed the silence. That was the end of it. For most, the story faded into the archives of climbing blogs and niche documentaries. Occasionally, Lina's name would be mentioned during lectures on high-altitude psychology or as a footnote in discussions of K2's fatality rate. But the world moved on. Except K2 didn't forget. Over the next few years, strange reports began to circulate again. Nothing solid, just murmurs among guides and Sherpas. A summit party in 2022 reported radio interference only at the exact elevation of Lina's final camp. A climber from Norway claimed to have heard a woman's voice humming near the ledge, a melody that didn't match any known song. When he reached the top, he couldn't recall how he'd gotten there. Another, in 2023, turned back just shy of Camp 3, refusing to explain. When pressed, he said only, she wasn't angry, she was waiting. These were easily dismissed as altitude hallucinations, stress responses, the mind playing tricks in thin air. But one story stuck. In March 2024, a solo climber, sponsored, live tracking his journey with GoPro and satellite relay, made camp just below the area known locally as Whispers Ridge. He was broadcasting brief audio logs to his followers each night. The final one came at 3:02 a.m. It was short, no music, no fanfare, just his voice, trembling. Base camp, this is Halden. I think I just saw her, a woman, standing on the edge. She didn't run. She looked right at me. She smiled. It's her. Then static. No distress, no scream, just silence. When the morning came, Halden was fine, alive, unharmed, but different. He aborted the summit, said he wasn't ready. In an interview a month later, he admitted something that hadn't gone public. There were no footprints, he said. But I swear the snow shifted, like she'd been standing there, then just wasn't. They asked him why he turned back. Halden didn't hesitate. Because I felt like, if I kept going, I wouldn't come back me. The mountain stands the same as it always has, cold, unmoved, beyond comprehension. But among the veteran guides and Sherpa teams, K2 has a new story, not told on official routes. Not in manuals, not in books. It's passed quietly, over firelight, and in low voices. They say a woman walks that ridge at night, dressed in red, never falls, never shouts, only watches. And sometimes she smiles,